All right, welcome back to the program. Taiwo Oyedele is here with me. He is the Chairman, Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms. Welcome to you, my friend. And
thank you, my sister. Good to see you.
good to see you. Congratulations are in order. Public congratulations. We've said that privately. How are you?
I'm fine. I have to be honest that, when you think about the work that needs to be done, sometimes it can be overwhelming, but then the good news is the amount of support, even me, I find it really it's very humbling. Everybody wants to help. So that's the good news. We have the resources to make it happen. It's plenty of work. We're happy to do it.
You're happy to do it
Yes.
because what a better time, and like I mentioned earlier, when your appointment came up, a lot of people were like, okay, that's the guy to do the job. Because these are things you've been saying.
Yeah, for so long.
Oh, you've said it many times here, we'll discuss it, we'll be like,
times.
what exactly
I'll
is
come
happening?
back and say it again.
So it was perhaps that a government now is listening and
Yes.
bringing you on board to do that. But I would like to know how many of you are in the committee, because we know you as the chairman. What's the constitution of that committee? How many of you are there? Then it was also mentioned yesterday there's a 400 level student. We don't know. It was just please clarify how many of you are there.
Let me clarify.
Yes.
So we don't have the exact number yet. It's going to be between 60 and 70 individuals. So it's a large committee representing about 38 institutions. Of course, those institutions like the Joint Task Board, you can't ask one person to come and represent Joint Task Board. You have to cover the 6 geopolitical zones. So we have those kind of issues, ICANN, CITN, ANAN, Bar Association, and then you have the organized private sector, manufacturers, NASME, Chambers of Commerce.
I was speaking with the NASME yesterday, and he was telling me that they were represented at the inauguration.
Yes, because we think that they're really very important to what we have to do. You have women in business. That sometimes people don't remember women, despite their very important role in the economy.
How about
whether
people with
it's
disabilities?
Business. People with disability, we have them as a stakeholder group, but not as a member. So which means when we start our engagement, we're going to be engaging with them. In fact, part of our plans also is that when we're having our meetings, press interaction, we'll do the sign language as well. So we factor them in 100% into our plans. Of course, you have so many government agencies, ministries and departments that need to be involved. FRS, Customs Service, Central Bank of Nigeria, NIPC, Justice Ministry, Ministry of Finance themselves. So that's the reason why it's a little bit large. So what we've done in terms of making it effective, you don't want to put 60 people in the room and trying to agree on a matter. It might take forever. So the idea is to break it into subcommittees, where the size of a subcommittee will not be more than about 10 to 15. And to focus on the broad areas that Mr. President has assigned to us. So you have a group working on one mandate, another one on another one. And then there's a steering committee where you now bring the head of those subcommittees together to make the final recommendation that goes to the policymakers for approval, and then we go for implementation. So the student that was there yesterday, so the idea was we thought we should bring in students. And then it was easy for us to say, these students have been doing task clubs on their own for years. Young people came together and they were promoting task culture. Sometimes they are looking for only 200,000 naira to organize events. And you can see the passion and the love for their country. So we thought this is a brilliant opportunity to bring them on board. So they're going to be part of the secretariat. So they will sit in all the meetings and help us with research. They will listen. If they have ideas, we'll listen to them. So it's not full membership, but to be honest, I think what they're even doing is more interesting than what the members will be doing. Yeah, so what we'll do is we plan to rotate it from one university to the other, so that for that 12 months, 1 month it can be University of Abuja, another one can be University of Lagos, OAU. So the lady that spoke yesterday was representing that constituency. Since we can't bring all of them to that meeting.
Let's talk about your mandates. Fiscal governance, revenue, transformation, then
growth facilitation.
The third one, growth facilitation. It was interesting to listen to Mr. President yesterday in terms of some key words he talked about. We shouldn't tax the seed, we should tax the fruits, we should support businesses to grow. He talked about raising GDP, his target raising tax to GDP to about 18%. There were a lot of things I took away from listening to Mr. President, and what my mind went to, because what's on now, what's been on since the removal of fuel subsidies. Mr. President, let us breathe. You said let us breathe. Yet we are even gasping for air. All of us are gasping for oxygen. So, inaugurating your committee yesterday, do you think that you've seen a political will on the part of this presidency to do that? Not because you're there now. You are not part of government.
I don't know whether I'm actually part of government. I feel like I'm now just for Nigerians. Before I was for Nigerians, but more of private sector. So now my constituency is just Nigerians. So if government is doing what I think is wrong, I find a nice way of saying it. I'm not going to be promoting government activities if it's inconsistent with the mandate of my committee. So I see the political will 100%, which is why you remember Mr. President said for the committee's work, we've been given milestones. The first 30 days is the quick wins. So under that first 30 days is where we're going to come out with our ideas about some of the interventions that government needs to introduce, because those are urgent things that we have to do. They cannot wait for 1 year. We wish it was something we had even done even before now. So we have our recommendations that we have, we put forward. We're going to be having meetings, a lot of meetings between now and let's say the next 3 weeks, so that in 30 days we have something ready. We really want Nigerians to know that this is not another committee. This is a committee where we are very intentional about what we want to do and getting it done. We're not writing reports and then hoping and praying that somebody will implement. No. The role of this, the work of this committee is first 30 days, quick wins. First 6 months, critical interventions. 1 year implementation, and all 3 milestones are running concurrently. So which means if we come up with a brilliant idea today to be implemented by the executive arm of the federal government, and Mr. President says it's fine, the following day we are writing the executive order or the regulation. If it's to do with amending the law, those are the ones we want to do within the 6 months. We'll write the bill. If it's to do with governors, we go to NEC and Governors Forum, convince the governors, we have their blessings, we move on with it. So that's the plan for this committee, and I think it's a template that if it works, and I'm very positive that it will, we can then use it subsequently. Because just think about anything in Nigeria. There's a report, at least one somewhere, and they're brilliant reports from Orosanya to something else. And more often than not, our issues are usually with implementation.
In fact, even while you were in PwC, you and your guys and even some other Big Four guys, I do really read a lot of reports. I've read many reports in many years concerning some of those things we're talking about. So perhaps the question now will be implementation. Now let's look at those 3 issues which I talked about earlier: fiscal governance, revenues, as well as
growth facilitation.
Let's break it down first. Fiscal governance. That has a lot to do with even some of the macro issues, something like debt and all of that. A whole lot. Just break it down for me.
Yes. So good question. So for fiscal governance, what we're looking at there includes spending, debt, and also revenue optimization. So if I further break it down, you think about something around fiscal limits and thresholds. If the Fiscal Responsibility Act says don't borrow more than this percentage of GDP, your budget deficit must not exceed certain amounts. Sometimes those laws will give you exceptions for emergencies or war or natural disaster, and then we pretend that that's what we've been going through every single year. It doesn't seem appropriate. We'll say, oh, we don't have a debt problem. Our debt to GDP ratio is below 35%.
We have a revenue problem.
We have a revenue problem, even though we are spending 96% to service the debt. The question is, what is the appropriate benchmark for Nigeria? We cannot just copy global templates. Those guys are spending less than 10% to service their debt, even when they are 200% to GDP ratio, like Japan. We haven't hit 40%.
40%, yes, yeah.
We're already spending the entire revenue to service debt. So it has to be that there's a different model and threshold that should work for us. In fact, we want to develop what we call a fiscal risk framework, which is not only for the federal government, but also for the sub-national level. So once we get their buy-in, they can then domesticate it and adopt. So that from time to time, you can even have a report that shows the states or federal government moving too close to the red line. And then what should you do to be able to, so that we are not reactive, we are proactive in how we manage the economy. Part of fiscal governance also requires, how do you ensure coordination? So both horizontally, federal government, in their 2023 budget, they had 63 MDAs collecting revenues. You have the monetary authorities are doing their thing. Sometimes the finance minister is not even aware they want to redesign the Naira. It's not good for us as a people. You need that coordination. Then you need the vertical coordination with subnational. They have their, powers in the constitution. Nobody is taking that away from them. But at the end of the day, if you are thinking about our people, they don't care whether the issue is federal or state or local government. They just want their life to be easy and peaceful, and for them to be able to, make their legitimate living without a lot of headache. So those are the things you find under fiscal governance. Now, when it comes to tax reforms, the major thing there are, number one, we want to review the national tax policy. It was last reviewed in 2017. The plan was to do that every 5 years, so it's now even overdue. That would enable us to incorporate modern economy. Things we've done over the past 6 years that have been great, how can we improve them? The ones that haven't worked, what do we need to do differently? So we have a new national tax policy when we are done. The bigger part is we want to rewrite the tax laws.
Constitution.
So some of our, so including bills to amend the constitution is part of our mandate. Some of our laws we inherited from the colonial masters. In fact, some of it, our colonial masters themselves inherited from the League of Nations over 100 years ago. The world has moved on, we have refused to move on. And those things are like now the tail that is wagging the dog. So what we want to do, our objective is, can we not even have a single tax code where you just take this piece of legislation, it tells you the major taxes, corporate income tax, personal income tax, value-added tax, another piece of legislation for administration of those taxes. So what you have today is you pick 4 different tax laws. They have different penalties for late filing and different interest rates. So if my offense is I did not file on time, why don't we have consistency? Then the third piece of legislation would be establishment law. So this would be laws establishing, we don't want the FRS to be called FRS anymore because it's not a federal government agency. It's a federation agency.
So the issue about mergers, sorry to cut your thoughts.
Yes.
Because you just took me there. I wanted to ask the question in terms of the merger amongst FIRS, NIMASA, as well as customs. Is that what your committee is looking at, especially with what you just said?
Yes.
That perhaps we should have a Nigerian Revenue Agency, just like you have even in the UK, that you have now His Majesty's Customs and Revenue.
Yes, HMRC.
Yes.
So what we're planning to do is we think that a merger is not realistic, especially in the near term. So what we want to start with is harmonization of revenue collection functions. So NIMASA will still be NIMASA. MPA will still be MPA, NCC will still be NCC, but they are being distracted now by those mandates of chasing revenue. We want them to be able to focus on their primary mandates of facilitating economic activities and supporting the Nigerian people. So that revenue function will now go to the FRS, whatever name we now call it.
But some of those, sorry again, you know, when we speak, we're always having this kind of insightful conversation.
Yes, no, it's useful.
Yeah. Some of these agencies which you've mentioned, like NCC and some of these other agencies, they generate that revenue not just because they're generating agencies, but because they generate their revenues alongside the operations of what they are doing.
Absolutely.
So how do you now have that harmonization done? Will FIRS live where it is they have a desk there or something? I really want to know how the workability will look like.
Yes, so it will be seamless. So this is something that is being done everywhere, even in Africa. In fact, even international passport, we visited Rwanda Revenue Authority. Even if you want to pay for international passports, you pay to the Revenue Authority. So the guys doing passport, I just focus on just doing passports.
Not immigration.
Yeah, not immigration. The person paying won't even know who they are paying to because the payment process is seamless. Some of it is just start something and you have paid. But the whole idea is let the person doing processing passport just focus on processing passports. If you are regulating telecommunication, just focus on how can quality of calls be good. Not chasing somebody has not paid, somebody has paid. So you won't notice it physically. What it will do is it will increase the efficiency of collection. It will enhance transparency because sometimes you don't have visibility over what is being collected. And the cost of collection will go down. Because just imagine, the FRS, their DNA is to collect revenue. So they know how to do it brilliantly, at least better than any other agency in Nigeria. And the other benefits you get from that is also Nigerians will pay less. So what you find is some agencies just create those taxes as they go along because if they think they need more money and the money is not forthcoming, they increase the levies that they charge to Nigerians. So that's the vision we have, and we think that we'll get the buy-in sufficient enough to push this through, both at the federal level and then also to help subnational to think the same manner so that the internal revenue services are the one collecting everything. Even when the law says the money belongs to that agency, look at the tertiary education tax. It's not the money of Federation, it's not the money of FRS. It belongs to Tertiary Education Trust Fund, but it's collected by FRS on their behalf. And that's one of the best performing taxes that is earmarked. It has to be that the fact that FRS is collecting it is one of the reasons why the efficiency is there. So once we're able to do that, we'll make significant progress in trying to harmonize taxes, how we collect them, how we account for them, and even more importantly, the quality of spending is part of the things we're going to be looking at.
So what you're saying now, in essence, is I'm getting that all the revenue-generating agencies, you guys concentrate on your mandate in terms of giving quality service or whatever it is you're doing to Nigerians. In the area of revenue collection, there should be like a one-stop shop where everybody
absolutely, that's the way to put it.
Isn't it?
One-stop shop. So if you approach an agency and you need to pay, remember again, part of the requirement is even on your website, we should already understand how much we need to pay, when we need to pay it. That clarity will be provided. So I know I need to get a driver's license.
I was coming to that.
Yes, I have to get a driver's license and it's 10,000 naira. So the process of payment should be so easy. Of course, there should be no cash collection because that one you cannot control. So simplify and provide multi-channels means of payment, either USSD, bank transfer, other than cash. Make it easy to pay.
How about for those that are not financially included, that can't go, and they still need these services? Because there are many of them in this country.
I agree. But what I will also tell you is that if you look at the data from NCC, you hardly find any adult that doesn't have a phone. You know, it doesn't have to be a smartphone. They just need one palasa phone, and they are good. That's why in Kenya, everybody is included in
Safaricom.
There is no, whether even people in the villages that never been to school, they are fully included through M-Pesa. So we can do that in Nigeria as well. So the third aspect now is the growth facilitation. And the reason why this is really important, to Mr. President is, you can't tax poverty. And Mr. President said that you have to first create prosperity, so you then share, out of that prosperity. So what we're going to be looking at under that, pillar is we're going to be very detailed by sectors. So if you take real estate, you take fintech. The fintech guys, you just need to speak to them for 5 minutes and you feel their pain. It seems like everybody says, they are important, but everybody is stressing them and giving them a lot of headache. We're going to spend time with them. We're going to be engaging with Nigerians in the diaspora. Sometimes we don't know how important their contribution is to our economy. Just sending us dollars to pay some bills there and there and providing dollar liquidity, apart from being Nigerians, first and foremost, means that they are a good stakeholder we must speak to, people living with disability. So we look at those different stakeholder groups and industries, and we now say, what are the impediments they're having to deal with? There are people trying to do exports. It's a nightmare. There are people trying to do import, is a big headache. Can we just simplify those things so people really feel like the government is there to support them rather than the government there to frustrate them? Sometimes there's over-regulation. Some of this aspect of our work, actually, the one that is cross-cutting, where we need to relate with other agencies. And that's why in the composition of the membership, you see a lot of government agencies that we believe will play a role in all of this.
Mm. How many taxes, I know, how many taxes do we pay averagely in Nigeria?
That's a very interesting question.
And how many of those taxes really are the revenue generating taxes? And is your committee, I heard you clearly when you say you're going to repeal. So which one should we be looking at? Perhaps at the end of the day, you and your colleagues will come up with. That's one. That if we will now have a threshold or a limit of the number of taxes that we're expecting to pay. Then secondly, the Finance Act. What role will the Finance Act be playing? Because I know that during President Buhari is when we really started the Finance Act being accompanied with a budget. This one, President Tinubu has suspended it for now. What are you and your colleagues going to be looking at in terms of the Finance Act as to what you will be doing now?
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. So on the first one, that's an interesting question. And the reason why I smile is I've been asked this question a few times, and I can tell you authoritatively there's no one in Nigeria that knows the answer. Nobody knows how many taxes we pay in Nigeria.
Really? Formal taxes? Okay, well, whether I should reframe it.
Yes,
how many formal taxes
formal,
do we pay?
Okay. Even the formal, I have to still qualify it. There's a law that is called Approved List of Taxes and Levies for Collection. And it has a schedule for federal government, state, and local government. If you count based on that, it's about 65. They've added a few to it,
that's
65. Even for many is an understatement, to my sister.
For what company?
Exactly. So there was a study we did for manufacturers a few years back. What we did was we just asked manufacturers across Nigeria, tell us the taxes you pay and send us a copy of the receipt, so you're not making up the story. In one state, we found 195 taxes that manufacturers alone pay. This is not what everybody pays, manufacturers alone. So it's a big headache for us as a country. So what we are hoping to do is, and that goes to the second part of your first question, which is, where are we really getting the money from? That I can tell you. About 98 to 99% of our tax revenue, local, state, federal government, is coming from less than 10 taxes, about 7. Value-added tax, company income tax, profit, petroleum profit tax, VAT, personal income tax for state is like the major one. Property tax should potentially be yielding a lot of revenue, not very much, but still sizable at the moment. And then you have customs and excise. These taxes are the ones giving us 98 to 99%. We now have these additional, depending on what number you're counting, whether it's official, pseudo-official or everything, it can be up to 200, giving us 1% or less, and with plenty of headache. And you're saying to yourself, why are we doing this to ourselves? In fact, I asked my team to do some analysis. The 9th National Assembly that ended a couple of months ago, so we went through all the bills at different stages. Guess what? We found bills, 44 bills with different new taxes being proposed to fund one agency here and there. So this problem was going to compound even further if we do nothing. Now, the whole idea for us is, why don't you focus on those major taxes that are really giving you your revenue, and then find a mechanism to harmonize everything else? Maybe local government should just collect 1 tax or 2, maybe property tax and something called council tax. Maybe state should collect only 1 or 2 taxes, personal income tax, a bit of property tax. Federal government, maybe they are collecting 3 or 4, which they share with everyone. And you focus your attention on those taxes, and you make sure that you design the burden of the tax to protect the poor people. So, I was saying to Lagos state government that if you want to really collect money from property tax in Lagos, you should be looking at exempting the bottom 75% of properties in Lagos.
Which will constitute?
Which will constitute around 3 million properties.
And what kind of properties?
I even use values.
Okay.
So if you focus on the top 25%, it's about 1 million properties. Each of that will be worth at least 100 million naira. Around the world, countries aim to tax you about 1% of the value of your property annually as property tax. If you do that in Lagos, we did just my simple analysis, 1% of 100 million value of 1 million property is 1 trillion. You know the secret to this? You dedicate the entire 1 trillion into taking care of the people. So roads, water. People would only complain the first year. Imagine what 1 trillion can do to the infrastructure about living standards across Lagos. Because people are actually paying more than that now, and they're getting less results. We all contribute, you know, if you're not fixing the road here, you're trying to do borehole, right? So at the end of the day, it's a win-win for Nigeria, in my view. So you harmonize those taxes so there are few of them, high revenue yielding and easy to administer. We then set up a framework that if anybody goes outside of that, our agreement, you know, you can't force them because local government have their powers, state have their powers. But once we get that consensus, we design a framework that if any state or local government goes outside of it, one, there will be a pool on which the taxpayer who has suffered that amount will be repaid with some admin charges. So in other words, a local government that insists on collecting, you know, there's wheelbarrow tax. Somebody is pushing wheelbarrow and you're taxing them.
Know.
Yeah.
Those guys here in Abuja, one of those days I went to the market, the in Wuse market popularly, and they clamped the guy. I was like, what exactly is the problem? He said, you don't pay 50 naira of
someone is just trying to survive. Like, oh. You are trying to transport food from one location to the other. That can be as high as 50 different levies. There was a guy who got frustrated. He just kept all the receipts and he recorded it. He was counting. It was 72 to move from one location in Nigeria to the other, just transporting food. And then we are surprised that food is expensive.
That will be added to the cost.
Exactly. So what we want to do now is address those problems once and for all. They were not imposed on us by God, which means the solution must come from men.
What we are suffering in Nigeria is not God.
Yeah, it's not God. God has been so kind to us.
It's man-made. Our problem has been human quick. Let me put it like that, not man quick, so that the men don't get jealous and say the women are not. So it's human quick in Nigeria. Now, let's take a look at this informal sector.
Yes.
Because I also get a sense from Mr. President that he doesn't want to tax poverty. And we have a lot of people that are multidimensionally poor in Nigeria, monetarily poor. Those are two different things. I would like to get your view as to what the committee would be doing concerning the informal sector, bearing in mind that the VDI initiative, that's that direct initiative of the FIRS with MATAN, things like that, how are you going to be harmonizing that? Then secondly, let's talk about tax waivers, tax credits given to these companies. What should we be looking at now? Because for some companies now it's as if they are taking it that we are not really, you know, a company will just come and say, okay, I use 65 billion to build this road. So is your committee also looking at those areas?
Okay, good question. I remember that I haven't answered your question on the Finance Act.
Yeah.
So the Finance Act, the analogy I like to use to explain this is like you have a car that was manufactured in 1948. And you've been passionate such that we can't recognize which make of car it is anymore. The engine is from a different make, the door is different. That was the Finance Act. What we want to do now is we just need a brand new vehicle.
So perhaps we should not have any Finance Act that will accompany the budget.
Yes.
Let everything just be in the budget. So from budget 2024.
Yes,
because it was as if the Finance Act was like an appendage.
Exactly.
We forgot to let's attach it.
Yeah, let's attach it. So while that was good on one hand, it has this downside of creating uncertainties because people don't know what you're going to come up again with. So we want to do this holistic reform so that in the next few years there will be no need to have another Finance Act. You may then say, let's look at our loss again in another 5 years. So we think that provides more stability and predictability to investors. So to your question about informal sector, so the idea and then this whole arrangement with MATAN, the Market Traders Association. So for us, we think that the most important thing is data. So, you know, we're trying to do intervention with first subsidy removal. We know there are poor people, but nobody is really confident when government says they're going to be sharing 8,000. People just shouted and said, don't share anything because we're not sure it will end up in the right hands. So that's not a problem in many countries where they have been very diligent in collecting data. So we are proposing that we use NIN for individuals and then use corporate affairs registration for businesses and companies. You know what that would do? Imagine that today we have the intelligence about every adult in Nigeria in terms of their behavior on their phone. You know, somebody has only managed to load 18 naira credit in a whole month, flashing people up and down. They don't have a bank account. You just know that they're poor. They have a bank account. The bank account never reached 10,000 naira balance at any point in time. They're unemployed. So those data, once you gather it, you can say, we want to give 10,000, and you just credit them. If they have a bank account, they get a credit in their bank. If they don't have a bank account, you credit their phone. You can make it a food stamp so that that credit on their phone, they can only use it to buy food. And then you can reconcile it with proper accountability. So the essence of our work is not to tax everybody. Is we're looking beyond tax to say, can we not do a bit of economic planning to even take care of our people when we need to in a credible manner? So I think that is where the Matan one will come in even more than the tax we are hoping to collect from them. Because by the way, 25 million per annum is exempted from VAT. That's 99% of them.
Exactly.
That's 99%. But you still need their data to know what they're doing for when government wants to. Even I even said that, you know, if I'm representing Matan, I would just have a list of demands: public toilets, clean water. I say, come and give us this first before we even comply with this. You know, so that's the way I see it in terms of going forward. I can't remember the other one.
Tax waivers?
Yes, tax waivers. You know, Mr. President says we are targeting 18% tax to GDP ratio in the next 3 years. And I've just said to you, we plan to repeal many of the taxes. We don't want to introduce new ones. We want to take away the burden from the poor. And then you're going to be wondering, where would the money come from? So this is one of the areas we think the monies will come from. Some of the incentives were reasonable and necessary 20 years ago. Nobody had bothered to review them. If you look at it today, if I want to design incentive policy for Nigeria today, would I have all of these incentives? The answer is no. Would I have any of them? Maybe. So we're going to be looking at it from the cost-benefit analysis point of view. For every 1 naira we give away, we must make values of more than 1 naira that we can quantify and measure. So we expect many of the incentives will go. We'll rationalize them so that we only leave the ones that are productive.
Like the road tax.
Like the road tax one, I think that one we should retain.
Okay.
But again, we're going to rely. One of the things we said there is that I think it was Edward Deming that said, "In God we trust." All of that must bring data. So for everything, we're going to be doing a lot of data. Bureau of Statistics is a member of the committee. So if the data suggests to us that the private sector is more efficient in fixing roads in terms of cost and quality and time to completion, then that's something to promote. If we see that we are wasting the money, then we recommend that it should be discontinued. So those are some of the ideas we are playing around with. You
know, at the beginning, you mentioned, you said a lot of stuff, and the question is, like we've heard in the past, so Nigeria, we have a revenue problem, problem. You mentioned it in passing, but I would like you to take a look at it more deeply. Many people have also said, even here on my platform, that we have a spending problem. Because even the little money we make now, we're spending it on frivolities. We're spending it on even the large political class and all of that, while we have very poor people. So I'm struggling to see how your committee would work, because your committee is not entrusted with the spending of the money. Yours is to recommend these are the areas of leakages, government, these are the things you can do. But can you share your thoughts on this with me?
Interestingly, it's part of our mandate, even though we can't control
how they spend.
How they spend, but looking at how they spend is part of our mandate, right? So that's the bit of quality of spending.
Okay. So what would it be doing specifically there?
Yeah. So what we're going to be doing is, first, we want a world-class global best practice reporting format, so that if you want to see what FRS has collected, it's not just 10.1 trillion. If you Google and you look at South African Revenue Service, you feel like paying tax to them, even though you don't live there. So the quality of reporting, and it's so robust that even when COVID came, I was speaking to the head of the revenue service in South Africa. They were actually the ones recommending interventions to government based on the data they have seen. They knew the sectors that were struggling the most because it was reflecting in the data that they had. So that proper reporting of revenue collected from who, you know, when, how much, refunds, have you paid, very comprehensive and robust report is the starting point. Then the second part is now that we know how much we've collected, you know, today in Nigeria, many of the collection agencies and consultants, they take their money from source before they report the nets. So which means we don't even have a good visibility of our revenue profile.
The cost of collection is
and
high.
those costs of collection in some cases is
trillions.
Yeah, it's significant. So once you have proper record and reporting of your revenue, the next thing is how it's being spent. So our idea about the spending is, first you need to prioritize, and you mentioned it already. We mentioned it also in the speeches at the State House yesterday. There's a Sustainable Development Goals component, and there's a multidimensional index component. So while we cannot force politicians how they spend their money, we'll be beaming our searchlight on what they're doing and how they're doing them. Sometimes just by, you know, calling people out could change behavior. By creating more awareness for the Nigerian people, can give them the platform and the opportunity to hold those leaders to account. So we're hoping that over time, that would improve the quality of spending. So should I be building a golf course or an airport as a governor when there's no, potable water? So that's that around spending. Your question again was, is it a revenue problem, debt problem, spending? I think it's all of it.
All of it.
Yes. You know, we have a spending problem, we have a revenue problem, we have a debt problem. So, and I think the debt problem is created by the spending problem and the revenue problem. So if I want to rank it, the spending problem
is the fundamental.
I think
down, then every other thing is following it.
Yeah, I think so actually. Yeah, I think it's spending. Because if you spend more than you earn, you have a revenue problem.
Exactly.
Because you have a revenue problem, you have to borrow.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think spending is actually the starting point.
That's why I asked. That's why I asked that question. Now, I'm seeing we just have 1 minute to go. Oh God! And it's just as if we just started. Oh, now let's talk about the synergy between fiscal policy and monetary policy, because I'm getting the sense also from this president that he wants coordination from both authorities. How are you going to be working with the Central Bank of Nigeria, especially regarding some of the issues around stamp duty, which we've heard, around some of the levies or indirect taxes that banks are collecting on a monthly basis, electronic EMT. You have different stuff and all of that. Then thirdly, tax morale. Do you think that with this your committee that the tax morale of Nigerians would really increase?
Yes. Yeah. We think that the tax morale would increase. It will take some time. It's not a quick fix of turning on the tap because it's based on trust. People have to trust government, and particularly the quality of reporting and how you spend the money is the biggest way of earning that trust. So it's part of our plan to improve that. We know where the tax morale is now. Part of what we do is to establish a baseline on all the key indicators so that in 1 year's time we measure it again and see the progress we've made. So that's how we intend to deal with that. So to your first question was on...
Now, something just came to my head. Well, before we go back to that, the tax to GDP ratio 18%. How visible is that between our 3 years?
It's very, because that's about...
Isn't it too much? Because Africa's average is about 16%. Let's answer that, then I'll come back to the next one.
We think that, if we double Nigeria's tax collection, it will get us to 18%, right? Because the reviewed one is around 10.86. Yes. The economy will grow at about 4 to 6%. Add everything together, just double the revenue and you get there. We think that the tax gap, people who should be paying taxes today and not paying, or are paying incorrectly, significant underpayment, is in the region of 20 trillion naira. So when you close that gap, you rationalize incentives, you reduce the cost of collection, which is affecting because it's net that we are reporting. Once I bring down cost of collection, what goes to the federation account, for example, would increase. And then you can also, think about other areas of where you can transfer informal taxes that people are already paying, but it's not going to government into the formal taxes.
That question was coordination between monetary policy and fiscal
policy.
Yes,
so what we want to do, we already have the central bank as a member of this committee. So we're going to be looking at the details of restriction items, should you be using import duties rather than as a restriction to foreign exchange markets. All of those coordination, we're going to be looking at them line by line and see how do we work together for the interest of the country.
So many questions. I think you have to come back. Because it's as if I've not even scratched the surface. I've not asked questions around luxury tax. I've not asked questions around fuel subsidy removal, the impact perhaps on diesel, which is also going high. Yes. Oh, you have to come back.
Yes, we're going to be doing this engagement regularly. Yes. So we see the media as our key partner.
Yes, I wanted to ask that.
Yes, you guys are part of our key partners. We have you listed already.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much for coming on today's edition of the program. I've been speaking with Taiwo Oyedele, who is the Chairman, Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms. That's how much we can take on today's edition of the program. I am Nancy Naji. Please join us again tomorrow for another interesting episode of this program. Be the best you can be and be the change that you want to see by now.